Long ago, before the dust of war settled on their lands, Nkwazi and Uchenna were one people. They shared rivers, farms, songs, and festivals. Their children played together in the open fields, their hunters shared the same forests, and their traders filled the same markets with baskets of millet, yams, and groundnuts. But peace, like water in a clay pot, is fragile. A quarrel began, small at first, like a crack on the pot. Disputes over land near the riverbank turned to arguments, arguments became insults, insults became bloodshed. Soon, spears were lifted, drums of war thundered, and the once united people became two kingdoms, divided by anger that lasted for generations. The kingdom of Nkwazi, in the north, was a proud land of hills and rivers. Its warriors were known for their iron-forged spears and their unmatched discipline. Their king, Obianuju, ruled with strength and caution, reminding his people that vigilance was the only way to survive against their old enemies. Nkwazi's people carried their bitterness like an heirloom, passed down from parent to child. The kingdom of Uchenna, to the south, spread across fertile plains where the soil was red and rich. Its people were famed for their harvests, their cattle, and their spirited dances that echoed deep into the night. Their leader, Chief Adiwale, was a man of dignity, stern but wise. Yet even in Uchenna, the memory of betrayal and loss was retold with fire, especially to the young, who grew up knowing the Nkwazi as rivals, never as brothers. Between them lay a border that was more than land. It was a wound, healed on the surface but aching deep within. Traders still met at certain markets, but their smiles were tight, their words cautious, and their hearts heavy with mistrust. The elders of both kingdoms often told their people, "Never forget what was taken from us." And so the people remembered, even when the old war was long gone. Children grew up hearing stories not of unity, but of division. Yet, as the sun rose and set over the hills of Nkwazi and the plains of Uchenna, none knew that a different story was quietly preparing to unfold. A story not written in the bitterness of the past, but in the beating of two hearts that refused to obey the drums of hatred. This, then, is how the tale of Nkwazi and Uchenna begins. Two kingdoms chained to yesterday, unaware that love was sharpening its voice, ready to speak louder than war. The people of Nkwazi woke each morning to the sound of pounding pestles against mortars, as women prepared meals of yam and millet for their families. Farmers tilled the terraced hillsides, their hoes striking the earth in steady rhythm, while fishermen cast their nets into the rivers that wound like silver snakes across the land. Children herded goats through the valleys, their laughter carrying in the wind. Yet beneath this rhythm of life lay a current of bitterness. At the evening firesides, elders told stories that were meant to warn but often only deepened anger. They spoke of the old war, of how Uchenna warriors had once crossed into Nkwazi fields, how blood had been spilled, how sons had been lost. The children listened wide-eyed, their young hearts shaped by tales heavy with resentment. In Uchenna, life was equally vibrant. The plains stretched wide, dotted with cattle, their bells chiming as herders guided them home each dusk. Women balanced calabashes of water on their heads, their steps graceful as music. Men gathered in the markets, trading yams, dried fish, and palm oil, while griots sang songs of courage and history. But even the songs carried the sting of division. In Uchenna's dances, when the drums beat loud, lyrics were woven that mocked the cold-hearted hills of Nkwazi. Children, with voices high and innocent, repeated those chants as they skipped rope or clapped hands. What should have been harmless games became lessons in rivalry. Politics, too, sharpened the divide. In the council houses, the elders of Nkwazi warned their king never to lower his guard, for Uchenna's smiles may hide sharp spears. And in Uchenna, Chief Adiwale's advisors reminded him that Nkwazi's silence is the silence of a coiled snake. Trade agreements were signed with stiff hands, festivals were held separately, and even the rivers that both kingdoms shared were spoken of as though they belonged to only one side. Travelers crossing the border were often questioned harshly. A simple trader carrying salt from Nkwazi into Uchenna might be met with suspicion. A woman selling Uchenna's groundnuts in Nkwazi's market was watched closely, as though every grain might carry betrayal. And so, though life in both kingdoms seemed full, fields blooming, markets bustling, drums echoing, the wound of the past never truly healed. The people lived with an invisible wall between them, a wall built not of stone, but of memory, words, and songs. But walls, no matter how strong, have cracks. And through one such crack, a different story was about to slip in, a story that would test everything the two kingdoms thought they knew about loyalty, honor, and love. In the highlands of Nkwazi, where the morning mist clung to the hills like a stubborn veil, lived the heir to the throne, Prince Kwame Kato, son of Oba Kato. Kwame was a young man in the full strength of his youth, tall, broad-shouldered, and steady-eyed. The warriors admired him for his skill with the spear and bow. The farmers respected him for walking among them during planting season, his hands stained with the same soil as theirs. The children adored him, for he often sat with them beneath the great iroko tree, teaching them riddles and telling them stories of courage. Yet even with such love from his people, Kwame's heart was not free. He was raised under the weight of history, with every step shadowed by the old war. Oba Kato, his father, often told him, "A prince must never forget the scars of his kingdom. Our blood remembers. If you are ever tempted to trust uchenna, recall the graves of your forefathers." Kwame would nod respectfully, but in the quiet of his chamber, the words sat on his chest like a heavy stone. For while he understood duty, he also longed for a future unchained from hatred. Each morning, Kwame trained with the kingdom's finest warriors. The clang of spears striking shields echoed across the courtyards. Sweat ran down his back as he sparred with men older and stronger than him, yet his determination always carried him to victory. The people whispered with pride, "Our prince is not just born of royalty, he is a warrior of his own making." Still, when training was over and the shouts of combat faded, Kwame would walk alone to the edge of the kingdom, where the hills sloped down toward the borderlands. From there, he could see the plains of uchenna stretching far and wide, golden under the sun. He would stand silently, as if listening for a truth the elders never told. He had never stepped foot into uchenna, yet he felt its presence in his life as one feels the presence of an old wound, always there, always tender. The stories he grew up hearing painted uchenna as cunning, untrustworthy, and dangerous. But Kwame, with a mind sharpened by thought as much as by war, often wondered, can an entire people be evil, or is it only the anger of the past that blinds us? Despite his doubts, duty demanded loyalty. When the elders summoned him to their councils, he listened carefully. When his father reminded him of Nkwazi's honor, he bowed deeply. He was, after all, a prince. His people's safety rested on his shoulders, and he carried that burden with quiet strength. Yet beneath the armor of his role beat the heart of a young man searching for more than duty, for truth, for peace, perhaps even for love. And so, while the hills of Nkwazi praised his name and his father trusted his loyalty, Prince Kwame's soul stood at a crossroads, one path paved with the iron of tradition, the other leading toward a future he could not yet see. Little did he know that fate was already moving, preparing to test not only his courage but his heart. In the fertile plains of uchenna, where cattle grazed freely and the earth yielded yams as large as a child's arm, there lived Princess Amora Adiwale, the only daughter of Chief Adiwale. Amora's presence was like the dawn, gentle yet commanding. Her gait carried the poise of royalty, but her eyes, bright and searching, revealed a spirit that refused to be bound by walls of tradition. She was admired not only for her beauty, but for the sharpness of her mind and the boldness of her voice. While many daughters of uchenna spent their days learning the arts of weaving and song, Amora chose to walk with the herders across the plains, asking questions about their cattle, their hardships, and their hopes. She sat among the women in the marketplace, listening to their laughter and complaints. She even slipped into the council gatherings, often standing quietly at the back until her father's stern gaze caught her. Chief Adiwale, proud and traditional, often warned her, "Amora, a princess must learn restraint. The voice of a woman is like water, it must flow within its boundaries." But Amora would bow her head only slightly, hiding the fire in her eyes. In her heart, she whispered, even water carves valleys when it refuses to stop flowing. Her mother, who had died when Amora was still young, left her a legacy of wisdom, a leather-bound journal filled with reflections and sayings. Amora treasured it, writing her own thoughts between the faded ink of her mother's words. In it, she wrote of her longing for unity, her curiosity about Nkwazi, and her dream of a day when borders would no longer divide people. Yet such thoughts were dangerous in Uchenna. The wounds of the past were kept alive in songs and proverbs. At every festival, when the drums thundered and dancers stamped their feet into the earth, the griots sang of Uchenna's victories over Nkwazi. Children cheered, their fists in the air, shouting, "Never bow to the hills of Nkwazi." Amora would clap along, smiling so as not to betray her doubts, but deep within, her spirit recoiled. She longed for songs of hope, not bitterness. Those who knew her closely described her as grace with a backbone of iron. She was gentle with children, kind to the elderly, and quick to laughter. Yet she spoke her mind without fear, even when her words unsettled the elders. More than once, a council member muttered, "That girl carries the stubbornness of a warrior in the body of a princess." Her father loved her dearly but often worried, "One day, her defiance will test more than just my patience. It will test this kingdom." But Amora was not reckless, she was purposeful. She knew the weight of her people's history, but she also believed history should not be a prison. She dreamed of new beginnings, though she did not yet know that her heart's journey would soon collide with that of a prince raised to be her enemy. And so, under the wide skies of Uchenna, Princess Amora walked her path, strong-willed, unafraid, and unknowingly stepping closer to the story that would shake two kingdoms. The dry season's sun burned hot over the borderlands, where the kingdoms of Nkwazi and Uchenna agreed, reluctantly, to hold their trade gathering. Such markets were rare, held only a few times each year, and though they promised prosperity, they carried tension like thunderclouds before rain. The site of the gathering was a neutral field, no man's land. Traders spread out mats and stalls, displaying calabashes of palm oil, smoked fish, woven cloth, carved gourds, and shining iron tools. Yet, though goods exchanged hands, trust did not. Every smile was watched carefully, every word weighed. The Nkwazi arrived in their neat, disciplined lines, led by their prince, Kwame, who came not only to oversee trade but also to demonstrate strength. He walked tall, his robe of indigo sweeping the dust, his spear-bearers close behind. His father had warned him, "Do not show weakness before Uchenna. Remember, their hearts are as slippery as their words." The Uchenna delegation arrived with equal splendor. Drummers announced their entry, and dancers in bright attire carried baskets of grain and ornaments. At their head was Princess Amora, who insisted on attending against her father's wishes. She argued that seeing the markets would help her understand the pulse of her people. Chief Adiwale, though reluctant, allowed it, on the condition that she remain under heavy guard. And so it was that the son of Nkwazi and the daughter of Uchenna stepped onto the same ground, unaware that history was about to bend around them. The market bustled with life, but beneath the chatter and the beat of drums, one could feel the silence of suspicion. Uchenna traders muttered when Nkwazi men handled their goods too long. Nkwazi women frowned when Uchenna buyers questioned their prices too sharply. Children were pulled back quickly if they wandered too far from their side. Kwame walked through the stalls, his sharp eyes scanning everything, not only the goods but the faces, the postures, the moods. His duty was to guard his people's honor. Yet, for a moment, his eyes caught a figure across the marketplace. Amora! She stood among Uchenna women, her head held high, her wrapper tied neatly, her hair braided with cowrie shells that caught the sunlight. She was not laughing or bargaining like the others. Instead, she watched the crowd with a gaze that was calm yet searching, as though she were measuring not the goods but the hearts of the people before her. Kwame found himself pausing. There was no reason to stare, yet his eyes refused to move away. Something in her poise struck him, an elegance softened by quiet strength. She seemed different. Amora felt his gaze before she saw him. When her eyes lifted, they met his across the market. For a heartbeat, the noise of the gathering faded. The songs, the arguments, the clatter of cowrie shells in traders' hands, all dulled into silence. Their eyes locked, hers, bright and unafraid, his, steady and questioning. Neither smiled. Neither turned away. It was as if they both sensed something unspoken, a recognition, though they had never met. But the moment could not last. A voice broke through. "Princess Amora, the price is fair," one of her guards barked, drawing her back to the business of trade. At the same time, Kwame's commander whispered urgently, "My prince, do not linger. Remember whose daughter that is." Kwame blinked, nodded, and moved on. Amora lowered her gaze and turned back to her companions. Yet both walked away with hearts strangely unsettled, carrying a moment they could not explain. That evening, as the sun sank and the traders packed their stalls, the people of Nkwazi and Oshina left the market with the same suspicions they had carried in. Nothing seemed changed, nothing seemed new. But in the secret chambers of two hearts, something had shifted, small, silent, but powerful. The first spark of a story that no council, no border, no hatred could easily contain. That night, after the trade gathering, Prince Kwame sat alone in the courtyard of his father's palace. The moonlight fell on the stone walls, and the air was cool with the scent of burning wood. Yet his mind was restless. He had faced warriors in combat, listened to fierce debates in the council house, and endured his father's stern expectations, but never before had a single glance unsettled him so deeply. He saw her still in his memory, the princess of Oshina, standing with dignity in the marketplace, her gaze steady as if she were unafraid of anything. "Why do I think of her?" Kwame whispered to himself. "She is my enemy's daughter." But the more he tried to dismiss the thought, the stronger it pressed against him, like a drumbeat that refused to be silenced. Far away in Oshina, Princess Amora also found no peace. She sat in her chamber, the glow of an oil lamp flickering against the walls. Her maids hummed softly as they prepared her bed, but she hardly heard them. Her thoughts drifted back to the prince she had seen, broad-shouldered, calm, his eyes holding both strength and sorrow. She had grown up on stories that painted the Nkwazi as heartless and proud. Yet the young man she had glimpsed was not the monster of songs. His gaze had carried something else, something human, something that stirred a quiet fire inside her. "No," she told herself, shutting her journal with a firm hand. "This is foolishness. He is a son of Nkwazi. His people carry spears against mine." But even as she tried to close the thought, her heart betrayed her with a flutter. Days passed. The trade gathering ended, and both kingdoms returned to their routines. Yet, like seeds planted in secret, the memory of that brief meeting began to grow. Kwame found himself walking more often toward the border hills, where the plains of Oshina stretched far beyond. He would stand silently, gazing into the distance as though the land itself might offer answers. His guards noticed but said nothing, though they whispered among themselves, "The prince seems distracted of late." Amora, too, became restless. She still joined her people in the markets and festivals, but her laughter came more slowly, her smiles more faint. In her journal, she began to write of things she dared not speak aloud. "Why does my heart betray me so? How can it be drawn to one who carries the blood of my enemies?" Neither could explain it, but both knew it. They were drawn to each other. They had spoken no words, shared no touch, yet something deeper than speech had already passed between them. It was dangerous, reckless, and forbidden. Still, it grew stronger, like a flame hidden beneath dry grass. And though both tried to smother it with duty and reason, love, once kindled, has a way of finding its own path. For in the silence of their hearts, Kwame and Amora already carried a truth too heavy for their kingdoms to bear, the forbidden spark of a love that should never have been. It began with chance, or perhaps with fate. After the trade gathering, Prince Kwame returned often to the border hills of Nkwazi, as if drawn by an invisible thread. He told his guards he went to inspect the farmlands or to oversee hunters, but in truth, He sought the quiet where the hills met the plains of Uchenna. Princess Amora, restless in her own kingdom, found herself walking the open plains more often than before. She would tell her attendants she wished to see the herders or right near the riverbank, but her steps always carried her closer to the border. One evening, as the sun melted into a horizon of fire and gold, they saw each other again, not across a bustling market, but across silence. Amora stood on her side, Kwame on his. Between them stretched the invisible line that had divided their people for generations. For a long moment, neither spoke. They only looked, the wind tugging at their clothes, carrying with it the distant sound of cattle bells and children's laughter. At last, Amora broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Tell me, Prince of Nkwazi, are your hills truly as cold as our songs say?" Kwame's lips curved into a faint smile. "Only to those who never set foot on them. To us, they are warm with life." Amora tilted her head, intrigued. "Then perhaps the stories we hear are nothing more than smoke." "Perhaps," Kwame replied, his eyes holding hers. "And perhaps your plains are not as treacherous as I was raised to believe." It was a small exchange, no more than a handful of words. Yet to them, it was like water on parched earth. From that day, they found ways to return. Never openly, never with witnesses. Sometimes in the cool hush of dawn, when the sky was pale and the world half asleep. Sometimes at dusk, when the sun sank low and shadows grew long enough to hide them. They did not cross the border, but they stood close enough to speak. At first, their words were cautious, like travelers testing the strength of a bridge. But soon they grew bolder, sharing thoughts that would have scandalized their people. Kwame spoke of his dream, to see a day when our children no longer inherit hatred, only the land, the rivers, and the sky. Amora shared her secret writings. "I write of peace as though it is a person I long to meet. Sometimes I wonder, if I ever find it, will my people accept it, or will they turn away?" They laughed softly at the irony of their lives, two heirs, each burdened with the expectations of kingdoms that would never accept the bond forming between them. And in those secret conversations, carried by wind and guarded by silence, their love began to grow, not in fiery declarations, but in gentle truths and quiet dreams. But silence is never safe for long. Already, a herder from Uchenna had noticed Amora's frequent walks toward the border. Already, a Nkwazi guard wondered why his prince lingered too often in the hills. The world around them was beginning to stir, unaware that in the fragile space between two kingdoms, a dangerous love was learning to speak. In both kingdoms, life moved as it always had. Farmers tilled, traders bartered, drummers played at festivals. But in the shadows of ordinary days, suspicions began to stir. Prince Kwame's guards were the first to notice. Their prince, once steady in his routines, now slipped away more often to the border hills. He would dismiss most of his escort, keeping only one or two men, and return long after the sun had dipped behind the ridges. One evening, as Kwame descended the hills with a distant look in his eyes, two guards muttered behind him. "Have you seen how often he goes there?" "Yes. And returns with his mind elsewhere. It is not the hills he seeks." "Then what is it? Or, who is it?" The whispers did not reach Kwame's ears, but the guards carried their unease into the barracks. There, speculation spread like dry grass catching flame. Some said the prince was meeting spies. Others feared he was hiding secrets too dangerous for a future king. Across the plains, Princess Amora's attendants grew puzzled by her newfound habits. Every week, she walks near the border, one maid whispered as she ground spices in the courtyard. "And always at strange hours," another replied. "She says it clears her mind, but tell me, since when does the mind clear in the company of silence?" One afternoon, Amora returned from her walk later than usual, her cheeks flushed with a glow that was not from the sun. Her nurse, an old woman who had raised her from childhood, noticed at once. "My child," she said gently, "your steps grow too frequent in the same direction. Do not forget, borders are watched not only by men, but by eyes of rumor." Amora only smiled faintly and changed the subject. But in her heart, the warning sank deep. In Oshina's market stalls, traders gossiped as they weighed yams and measured millet. "The princess lingers too often by the border," someone whispered, "and the prince of Nkwazi is often seen there too," came the hushed reply. The story grew, as stories always do. By the time it reached the ears of minor chiefs, the whispers had turned into cautious warnings. Meanwhile, in Nkwazi, the elders began to notice Kwame's distraction during council meetings. Once, when an elder was recounting a story of Oshina's treachery, Kwame's face betrayed a flicker of doubt instead of the expected anger. The old men exchanged sharp glances, their thoughts unspoken but heavy. Neither Kwame nor Amora realized how closely they were being watched. For them, their meetings were small oases of truth in a desert of division. For everyone else, they were shadows moving strangely against the order of things. And in kingdoms where memory was sharper than forgiveness, shadows were often feared before they were understood. The whispers had begun. Soon, whispers would grow into questions, and questions into accusations. But for now, Kwame and Amora continued their secret conversations, unaware that their love was no longer hidden from the eyes of the world. The hall of the Nkwazi Council was dim, its mud walls painted with fading murals of past victories. Drums beat faintly outside, summoning the elders to gather around their prince. Kwame sat before them, his jaw set, his heart restless. One of the eldest men, with skin creased like bark and eyes sharp as flint, leaned forward on his staff. "Prince Kwame," he began, his voice heavy with age and authority, "a king is not measured by the strength of his arms alone, but by his loyalty to the land and its people." Another elder, broad-shouldered despite his years, struck the floor with his stick. "You disappear too often, Prince. And when we speak of Oshina, the treachery of their raids, the blood they spilled, you are silent. Have you forgotten the cries of your forefathers?" Kwame swallowed, his fingers tightening against his knees. He wanted to speak of peace, of the burden of endless hatred, but the room was not safe for such thoughts. "Never forget," the eldest whispered, his voice low but sharp, "the blood of Nkwazi runs in your veins. One day you will wear the crown, and when you do, your duty will be to protect us from Oshina, not to soften before them." Kwame bowed his head, the weight of duty pressing against the flame of longing in his heart. Far across the plains, Princess Amora sat in her father's courtyard, the air thick with the scent of palm wine and roasted maize. Around her, women sang while pounding yam, but her ears were filled with a quieter sound, the cautious voice of her father's advisor. "Amora," the old woman said, her gaze steady, "a princess carries her people's honor in her footsteps. Your heart is young, your spirit wild, but listen well, rumors are seeds. Once planted, they grow into weeds that choke even the strongest name." Amora lowered her eyes. "And what weeds do they speak of me?" "That you wander too close to Nkwazi's border. That perhaps," the woman's voice trembled, then hardened, "perhaps your heart leans where it should not." Amora's father, a stern chief with a warrior's scars across his chest, turned his gaze upon her. His tone was not cruel, but it was firm as stone. "Daughter, do not dishonor Oshina. Our people still carry wounds from their spears. If you walk too far into forbidden paths, you will bring shame not only upon yourself, but upon this house." The words stung like lashes. Amora nodded, but inside her spirit wrestled with fire. For she knew her heart was already bound to the one name she was forbidden to speak. That night, both Kwame and Amora lay awake beneath separate skies. Kwame's thoughts echoed with the words, "Your duty is to Nkwazi." Amora's heart burned with, "Do not dishonor Oshina." Two kingdoms had spoken, two elders had warned, and yet, across the silence of the land, their hearts still reached for one another. The more the world forbade them, the more their secret bond deepened. The moon hung low over the plains, silver light painting the grasslands between Nkwazi and Oshina. It was here, in the hush of night, that Kwame and Amora met once more, their footsteps careful, their eyes scanning for shadows of guards who might be watching. Amora arrived first, her cloak drawn close against the night wind. She stood by an ancient baobab tree whose roots twisted like the veins of the earth itself. When Kwame's figure emerged from the darkness, her heart leapt. "Kwame," she whispered, relief and fear mixing in her voice. "Every step I take toward you feels like walking a path lined with spears." Kwame reached for her hand, his palm warm and steady. "And yet we keep walking. Perhaps love itself is the bravest journey." They sat beneath the baobab, the night alive with the chirping of crickets. For a while, neither spoke, only listening to the rustling wind. Then Amora turned to him, her eyes sharp with resolve. "They warn us, they threaten us, they bind us in chains of the past. But I cannot," her voice cracked, "I will not let them tear me away from you." Kwame's chest ached at her words. He took a deep breath and spoke as though sealing a vow before the ancestors themselves. "Amora, I give you my word. No matter what storms rise, no matter what walls they build between us, my heart will remain yours. I will not betray this love." Amora's fingers tightened around his. "Then hear mine. Even if they lock me away, even if they promise me crowns or riches, I will not forsake you. My love is not a leaf blown by the wind, it is a root sunk deep in the earth." The two clasped hands beneath the tree, the silence of night becoming their witness. "Let this tree hear our words," Kwame said softly. "Let the stars carry them. No elder, no kingdom, no war shall break us." Amora leaned her forehead against his. "Then it is sealed. We are one, though the world may rage." For a long moment, they stayed there, two hearts beating against the tide of history. Above them, the branches swayed gently as though the earth itself acknowledged their oath. But far away, unknown to them both, whispers were already growing louder. Servants talked in hushed tones, guards exchanged knowing glances. Their love, once a spark, was becoming a fire too bright to stay hidden. And the world was preparing to smother it. The dry season had left the borderlands brittle. Grasslands withered, rivers thinned to trickles, and the fertile patches of soil along the narrow Umoko stream became more precious than gold. 4 years, the stream marked the boundary between Kwazi and Uchenna, its banks shared only under careful, uneasy agreements. But when a group of Nkwazi farmers crossed to water their cattle, tensions flared. One morning, Uchenna herders found the cattle grazing on their side. Voices rose, spears were pointed, and insults cut through the air like blades. "This land is ours," shouted an Uchenna elder, his face lined with anger. "Your people steal water as if it were yours to command," an Nkwazi warrior retorted, slamming his spear into the dry soil. By noon, the quarrel had spread like wildfire. Both villages near the border sent messengers racing to their capitals. In the marketplace of Nkwazi, women whispered of Uchenna's arrogance. In Uchenna, men at the palm wine calabash swore that Nkwazi had grown bold enough to trample their pride. In Nkwazi's council hall, the elders pounded their sticks against the floor, their voices full of fire. "They test our patience," one shouted. "Have we forgotten the blood of our ancestors spilled at Umoko?" another bellowed. Kwame sat among them, his heart torn. He thought of Amora's words beneath the baobab tree, of their vow for peace. But the faces around him were hardened, blind to anything beyond vengeance and pride. Meanwhile, in Uchenna's palace, Amora's father listened as his chiefs roared for action. "If we let Nkwazi drink from our stream, tomorrow they will claim our fields. They seek to weaken us with politeness while their prince plots in silence." Amora's chest tightened. She knew Kwame was no plotter, no thief. Yet, as her father's gaze grew darker, she realized the tides of anger were not so easily turned. That night, Kwame stole away to the baobab tree, desperate for Amora's presence. She was already there, waiting. "War is coming," Amora whispered, her voice trembling. "They call for blood over a stream." "A stream, Kwame." Kwame clasped her hands. "It is not the stream. It is the hatred that never died. They wait for any excuse." Amora's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "And us? What will become of us if war returns?" Kwame's jaw tightened, his spirit caught between two worlds. We must hold to our oath. No war, no kingdom, can unmake what we swore. She leaned into him, her heart aching. But deep inside, both knew the storm building around them would not be stopped by whispered vows alone. The border dispute, small as it seemed, had opened old wounds. Spears were sharpened, drums of warning rolled across the plains, and tongues spat words of fire. The land trembled with the promise of war, while in the shadows, the lovers clung to one another, praying their bond would not shatter under the weight of generations. The air in both kingdoms grew heavy with suspicion. Messengers ran between councils, war drums echoed in the distance, and every eye seemed sharper, hungrier for proof of betrayal. It was in this tense silence that truth finally broke free. Kwame had stolen away once more to the baobab tree, unaware that a pair of Nkwazi hunters had followed his trail. They crouched in the shadows, spears in hand, their eyes narrowing as they saw the prince embrace a young woman cloaked in uchenna colors. They did not hear the words whispered between the two lovers. They did not see the tremor of fear in Amora's hands or the desperate hope in Kwame's eyes. All they saw was betrayal. By dawn, the hunters had spread their tale like wildfire. The prince of Nkwazi shares the night with Uchenna's daughter. He gives his heart to the enemy. In the council hall, the elders were livid. Our own prince, tangled in the arms of Uchenna, one spat. He spits on the blood of our ancestors, shouted another. The people murmured in fury. Some demanded Kwame be stripped of his rights as heir, others called for war, convinced that Uchenna had bewitched their prince to weaken Nkwazi's resolve. Kwame stood silent in the center of the hall, the flames of torches casting long shadows across his face. He wanted to speak, to say that love was no betrayal, but the weight of 100 eyes burned against him. Across the river, word had reached Uchenna as well. The princess consorts with Nkwazi's son, villagers cried. She dishonours our chief. She lays our pride at the feet of our enemies. In her father's palace, Amora was dragged before her family. Her father's voice thundered across the courtyard. Is it true? Do you lie with the son of Nkwazi? Amora lifted her chin, her voice trembling but unbroken. Yes. I love him. And I will not deny it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some spat at the ground, others shouted for her confinement, while a few wept at the shame they believed she had brought upon Uchenna. By nightfall, both kingdoms raged like storms. Markets buzzed with curses, warriors sharpened their blades, and children were hushed with warnings of war. Kwame, locked in his chambers, pressed his palm against the cool wall, as if reaching across to Amora through the darkness. Amora, confined to her father's compound, sat by her window with tears she refused to let fall. Their love, once hidden in whispers and shadows, now stood in the open, naked, raw, and hated. The spark they had guarded so carefully had ignited a fire that threatened to consume them both, and perhaps, the peace of the land itself. The sun had barely risen when the drums of summons echoed across Nkwazi and Uchenna. In both lands, elders gathered, their staff striking the earth as they entered the council halls. The time for gossip was over, judgment had come. Prince Kwame stood at the center of the great hut, its walls adorned with spears and shields that spoke of past wars. Around him, 12 elders sat in a circle, their eyes hard as stone. The eldest, his beard white as cotton, leaned forward. Kwame, son of Nkwazi, heir to our throne. Word has spread that you give your heart to the blood of our enemies. Is this true? Kwame's voice did not falter. It is true. I love Amora of Uchenna. The council erupted in shouts. Some struck the ground with their staffs, others covered their faces in disbelief. Then hear us, boy, thundered one elder. Your love is a betrayal. You must cut her off at once. Swear before us, before your people, that you will abandon this foolishness. Kwame's jaw tightened. I cannot. To abandon her is to abandon my own soul. Murmurs of fury filled the hall. One elder spat at the floor. Another shook his head and whispered, he will bring ruin upon us. But Kwame stood tall, refusing to bow, though the weight of their disappointment pressed like chains on his chest. Across the river, Amora faced her fate. She was brought before her father, the chief, and the circle of Oshina's elders. The hall smelled of palm oil lamps and burning incense, but the air was heavy with judgment. The chief's voice thundered, "Daughter, you have brought shame upon this house. Your heart, your loyalty, should belong to Oshina. Instead, you give it to the son of those who once spilled our blood." Amora lifted her chin, though her knees trembled. "I love him, father. And I will not lie to you. My heart belongs to Kwame." Gasps filled the room. One elder slapped her staff against the ground. "Then she must be contained," she hissed. "Yes," another agreed. "Place her in seclusion. Let her see no visitors. Let her forget this madness." Her father's face hardened. "Until you renounce this shame, Amora, you will not walk freely among the people of Oshina." The verdict was sealed. Guards led her away, not cruelly, but firmly, as though she were no longer a princess but a prisoner of her own heart. That evening, Kwame stood in his chamber, fists clenched, the words of his elders echoing in his ears. Across the plains, Amora sat behind barred windows, the night air cool against her face but her spirit burning. Both had been given the same command: abandon love or abandon honor. And yet, in the quiet of their hearts, their vow beneath the baobab tree still rang louder than the voices of 100 elders. For weeks, the borders tightened like a noose. Messengers carrying even the simplest greetings between Nkwazi and Oshina were stopped, their satchels emptied, their words silenced. Guards lined the Umoko stream, spears gleaming in the sun, as though preparing for war. In Nkwazi, Kwame was kept under watch. Whenever he left the palace, 2 warriors followed him like shadows. At night, when he tried to slip out, he found the gates barred. Even his most trusted servant, who once carried secret notes to Amora, was questioned and threatened. In Oshina, Amora's seclusion grew heavier by the day. Her windows were guarded, her steps measured by the eyes of attendants. When she tried to send a message hidden in a woven basket of palm fruits, the guard who discovered it brought it straight to her father. The note was torn before her eyes, her words scattered like ashes in the wind. Kwame wrote anyway. On nights when the moon glowed, he poured his heart into scraps of parchment. "Amora, though they cage me, my spirit flies to you. Hold to our oath. I will not yield." But each letter was intercepted before it crossed the border. Some were burned, others locked away, never to reach her hands. Amora too wrote in secret, her words pressed into cloth scraps with charcoal. "Kwame, they try to silence me, but my heart still beats your name. Even in darkness, I see you." She hid them in baskets, tucked them into the hems of servants' robes, even tried slipping them into the river's flow. None found their way to him. Days turned into weeks. Amora sat by her window, watching the horizon when Nkwazi's hills rose faintly in the distance. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not for her own confinement, but for the silence that grew heavier with each passing day. Kwame trained with the warriors, his body strong but his spirit hollow. Every clash of spear against shield reminded him that his people prepared for war while he longed only for peace, and for her. At night, when sleep refused to come, both whispered into the dark, as if the wind itself could carry their words, "I will not forget you." Though they remained apart, their love did not wither. Instead, it grew sharper, like a wound that refused to close. And in that ache, both began to understand, no matter what walls were built, no matter how many letters were torn, they could not be broken by silence. But the kingdoms, blinded by anger, could not see this truth. To them, separation was safety. They did not know that love, denied, was turning into defiance. In the courtyards of Nkwazi, young men sharpened their spears until sparks flew, their anger echoing louder than the drums. "They say our prince would lay down with Oshina's daughter," one youth spat as he tested the edge of his blade. "He dishonours us," another growled. "If he cannot lead us, then we must lead ourselves, to war." At the wrestling grounds, chants rose like thunder, Better to die a warrior than to bow to Uchenna. Blood for blood. Spears for spears. Even in the markets, women muttered as they pounded yam, their voices bitter. What kind of heir forgets his people's wounds? If he loves Uchenna more than Kwazi, then let him rule there. Kwame, though heir to the throne, felt the sting of his people's scorn in every look, every whispered curse. He walked through the palace, his shoulders heavy, hearing not the cheers of loyalty but the murmurs of betrayal. Across the Umoko stream, Uchenna's youths were no less inflamed. They gathered in the moonlight, drums pounding, their voices fierce with rage. "Amora spits on our pride," cried one. "Let her stay with Nkwazi if that is where her heart lies," another shouted. Sparks lit the air as they danced with torches, their chants carrying across the plains, "Never again shall Uchenna bow. War will cleanse this shame." In the palace, Amora's father listened to the uproar. He sat silent, his jaw hard, knowing his daughter's heart had become the people's fury. Every call for war was another blow to his authority, another scar upon his house. Whispers turned to shouts, shouts turned to drums, and drums turned to threats of war. In Kwazi, the people demanded Kwame renounce Amora or be cast aside by Uchenna. The people demanded Amora be disowned, or worse. From their chambers, both lovers heard the noise of the crowd, felt the heat of the storm building around them. Amora pressed her forehead against her window bars, whispering into the night, "They call for war in my name. Kwame, what will become of us?" In his chamber, Kwame clenched his fists until his knuckles bled. "They can curse me, they can strip me of crown and honor, but I will not surrender you, Amora." The land itself seemed to tremble with fury. Hatred, passed down through generations, had found fresh fire in their love. And soon, the fire would demand more than words. The palace of Nkwazi had become a prison. Guards followed Kwame like shadows, the council watched him with hawk eyes, and his people whispered his name with scorn. Yet, each night, the memory of Amora's voice beneath the baobab tree haunted him more than the chains of duty. On the 7th night of his confinement, Kwame could no longer bear it. He stood at his chamber window, staring at the moonlight spilling across the plains, and whispered to himself, "I would rather face 1,000 spears than live one more night apart from her." When the guards grew drowsy at their posts, Kwame wrapped himself in a plain cloak, concealing the royal beads from his neck. With quiet footsteps, he slipped past the gates, scaling the back wall of the palace grounds. The air was cold, the grass wet with dew, but his heart pounded with fire. He moved swiftly, avoiding the main paths, crossing the fields toward the Umoko stream. Every rustle in the grass felt like a threat, every shadow like a spy. But Kwame pressed on, guided not by fear but by love. Amora, too, had not been idle. Though confined, she had bribed a sympathetic maid to leave her chamber door unbarred for a single night. Wrapped in a shawl, she slipped past her father's guards, her heart racing. She reached the baobab tree first, breathless, clutching its rough bark as though it could shield her from the world. Then, from the darkness, she heard his voice. "Amora!" She turned, and there he was, her prince, her defiance, her vow made flesh. Tears welled in her eyes as she ran to him, and for a moment, the world's fury fell silent. They embraced beneath the vast sky, the baobab standing witness once more. "Kwame," Amora whispered, her voice trembling, "they will destroy us if they find us." "Then let them try," he answered, his arms tightening around her. "I would rather die by their spears than live by their chains." She pulled back, searching his face. "Our love is a fire they fear, but it is also the light they need. Can't they see?" Kwame touched her cheek, his voice low but fierce. "One day they will. Until then, we will not bow. We will not break." And so, beneath the same tree where they had sworn their first oath, they renewed it, no longer as two fearful lovers, but as two defiant hearts willing to risk everything for one another. But they were not as alone as they believed. A pair of eyes watched from the distance, one of Uchenna's border guards, who had followed Amora's trail. He saw their embrace, their whispers, their defiance. By dawn, the kingdoms would know the lovers' bond had not been broken. And with that knowledge, fury would burn brighter than ever. The dawn after Kwame and Amora's secret meeting broke with a storm of whispers. The guard who had spied upon them carried his tale to Oshina's chiefs, and soon, word ran like fire to Nkwazi. The council houses of both kingdoms trembled with rage. Elders gathered in haste, their staff striking the ground in anger, their voices rising like the rumble of thunder. "They mock us," one Nkwazi elder spat. "They mock the blood spilled by our ancestors." "In their arms lies betrayal," an Oshina elder growled. "If we allow this flame to burn, it will consume us all." For once, the divided lands agreed. This love must be destroyed, not with swords, but with shackles of duty. By midday, a pact was sealed. Kwame would be given to the daughter of a wealthy Nkwazi general, a union meant to secure loyalty within their own borders. Amora would be betrothed to a prominent Oshina warrior, a man fierce enough to guard her heart by force if needed. "Their love is a weed," the Oshina chief declared, his voice grim. "We shall root it out by planting them elsewhere." The Nkwazi council agreed. "We will bury their defiance under the weight of marriage. Once bound, their childish rebellion will wither." That night, Kwame was summoned before the elders. They spoke not with counsel but with decree. "You will marry," the eldest among them ordered, his voice sharp as a spear. "Your bride is chosen. Through her, you will strengthen this kingdom and erase your shame." Kwame's fists clenched at his sides. "And what of my heart? What of the vows I have sworn beneath the baobab tree?" "Your heart belongs not to you," the elder snapped. "It belongs to Nkwazi. To disobey is to betray your blood." Kwame bowed his head, but in his chest, fire raged. In Oshina, Amora faced the same cruel decree. Her father's voice was heavy with sorrow but unbending. "Daughter, your will has brought shame upon our house. You will marry the warrior Jelani. His strength will keep you safe, his name will restore our honor." Amora fell to her knees, clutching her father's robe. "Father, I beg you. My heart is already bound. To tear it away is to kill me." But the elders gave no mercy. Better a living daughter in duty than a dead one in Dishna. Amora's tears fell freely, but her spirit did not break. Deep within, she whispered to herself, "No force of man or tradition will take him from me." Messengers rode across the lands, preparations began, and drums of marriage were carved and polished. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered hotter than before. For if chains could not bind love, then forced unions would only ignite rebellion. And as night fell over both kingdoms, Kwame and Amora stared out from their separate prisons, each whispering the same vow into the darkness. "They may bind us to others, but our souls are already one." The days following the elders' decree were suffocating. Guards shadowed Kwame's every step, while Amora was kept in her father's compound, her movements closely watched. Both kingdoms prepared for the grand marriages, announcing them with songs that felt like dirges in the lovers' ears. But when the moon rose full and pale over the land, fate stirred. Kwame, restless in his chamber, whispered to himself, "If love must die, let me die chasing it, not surrendering to chains." Far away, Amora gazed through the bars of her window, whispering the same thought to the wind, "If they bind me to another, they bury me alive." That night, unseen forces of courage moved them both. Kwame slipped away from the palace under the cloak of darkness, trading his fine garments for the plain cloth of a traveler. He carried nothing but a dagger and a pouch of dried food. Meanwhile, Amora, with the help of a sympathetic handmaiden, escaped through a hidden passage long forgotten beneath her father's compound. Her feet bled on the rough earth, but her spirit soared with each step that carried her closer to freedom. By dawn, fate brought them together at the edge of their kingdoms, where the river Lusaro curved like a scar between Nkwazi and Oshina. There, they embraced, weary, breathless, but alive. Beyond the river lay Tsanari, a humble border village known for neutrality. Its people traded with both kingdoms but bowed to neither, living in peace while others nursed grudges. Kwame and Amora entered Sanari as fugitives, but the villagers welcomed them as weary travelers. They offered food, rest, and most of all, silence. For the first time, the lovers walked freely hand in hand through the dusty paths of the village. No guards, no spies, no looming decrees. Children laughed around them, unburdened by tales of war. For a fleeting moment, Kwame and Amora tasted the life they had always dreamed of. When the sun rose again, word of their escape spread like wildfire. In Nkwazi, the elders' fury shook the council hall. "The prince has betrayed his blood," they thundered. "He abandons his duty for a daughter of our enemy." In Uchenna, Amora's father struck his staff against the ground. "She has disgraced us, running into the arms of a rival's son. If she will not obey, then let her face the consequences." Both kingdoms sent scouts to Tsanari, determined to drag the lovers back. But the neutral village stood firm, declaring, "Within Tsanari's walls, no spear is raised for war. Here, all are welcome." For the first time, Kwame and Amora no longer needed to whisper their affection. They sat openly beneath the village baobab, speaking of dreams, not of kingdoms, but of a world where children from Nkwazi and Uchenna might play together without fear. "Here," Amora said softly, laying her head against Kwame's shoulder, "I am not a princess. I am only a woman in love." "And here," Kwame replied, "I am not a prince. I am only a man who has found his heart." But as the drums of pursuit echoed in the distance, they both knew, peace in Sanari could not last forever. Their love had already shaken thrones. The escape of Kwame and Amora spread swiftly across both lands. In the courtyards, people whispered, in the marketplaces, traders argued, and in the huts, mothers hushed their children with tales of defiant love that could invite ruin. To the elders, however, the story was no romance. It was humiliation. In Nkwazi, the council declared, "Our prince spits upon duty. If we do not reclaim him, we lose the respect of our people." In Uchenna, the chiefs thundered, "Our daughter abandons honor. If we do not return her, our enemies will call us weak." So both kingdoms resolved upon one bitter course: send warriors into Tsanari to hunt them down. On the third night after the lovers' flight, the drums of war beat rolled across the hills. From the gates of Nkwazi marched 30 warriors, shields gleaming in torchlight. Across the river, Uchenna answered with 30 more, spears raised high beneath the moon. Those sworn enemies, their purposes aligned for once, not peace, but possession. The people of Tsanari, hearing of the pursuit, trembled. Their village was small, their laws simple, no spear lifted in anger, no blood spilled within our walls. Yet now, 2 storms bore down upon them from either side. In Tsanari, Kwame and Amora learned of the coming danger from a traveling herdsman. The news struck like cold steel. "They come for us," Kwame murmured, pacing beneath the baobab. "Not as son and daughter, but as property stolen away." Amora placed her hand on his arm, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Then let them come. We have already chosen each other. No army can unchoose us." Her courage steadied him, but deep within, Kwame's heart burned. He knew what it meant when 2 rival warbands marched on the same path. Blood would surely be spilled, and it would be their love that sparked it. The Nkwazi warriors moved swiftly, their leader declaring, "The prince is ours. No Uchenna hand shall touch him." Across the fields, the Uchenna warriors shouted, "The princess belongs to us. No Nkwazi spear shall claim her." The roads toward Tsanari trembled under their boots. Farmers abandoned their fields, traders abandoned their caravans, and children huddled in fear as 2 tides of steel drew closer. In Tsanari, the elders gathered, their faces grave. "Our peace has shielded us for generations," one elder said. "But now, love has drawn war to our gates. Shall we betray these 2 and hand them over, or shall we stand by the law of our fathers?" Silence weighed heavy in the council hut until the oldest elder spoke. "Tsanari does not break its word. If these lovers came seeking refuge, then refuge they shall have. Let no spear rise within our walls." The people nodded, though fear clutched their hearts. At sunset, dust rose from both ends of the valley. The warriors of Nkwazi and Oshina had arrived, their chants echoing across the hills, their weapons flashing in the dying light. In the center of the village, Kwame and Amora stood hand in hand. Neither fled. Neither bowed. Amora whispered, "They think they come to claim us. But it is they who shall be tested." Kwame tightened his grip on her hand. "Let them see what love defends." And so, as night fell over Tsanari, the lovers braced themselves for the storm. As the war bands closed in on Tsanari, the villagers hurried Kwame and Amora into the hills. There, in a cave hidden behind thick brush, they found shelter. The cave was dark and damp, its floor strewn with old ashes from shepherds who once camped there. The village elder who guided them whispered, "Stay here. Neither Nkwazi nor Oshina will respect our walls. When they meet, it will not be for talk but for blood." With that, the elder left, leaving the lovers in silence broken only by the distant beat of war drums. The flickering firelight danced on the stone walls as Kwame and Amora sat side by side. For a long time, neither spoke, for fear pressed on their chests. Then Amora, her voice trembling, broke the silence. "Kwame, do you see how foolish this all is? 2 kingdoms, once one, now torn apart because of pride, and we, the children, are left to carry the wounds of battles we never fought." Kwame's jaw tightened. He stared into the fire, his eyes heavy with anger. "I trained my whole life to lead Nkwazi, to defend its borders, to hate Oshina as I was taught. But when I met you, Amora, I saw how empty it all was. What do we guard? What do we fight for? Old grudges and graves." Her hand found his, warm against the cold of the cave. "And yet, if they catch us, they will spill more blood, all in the name of kingdoms too stubborn to remember their shared heart." The flames cast their shadows on the walls like spirits dancing. Amora leaned her head on Kwame's shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes I dream of a place where Nkwazi and Oshina are not names of enemies, but names of neighbors. Where children from both sides fetch water from the same stream, where trade is not guarded by spears but by trust." Kwame's lips curved into a sad smile. "And in that place, I would walk beside you, not in hiding but in honor. No guards. No decrees. Just us, free beneath the sun." Their eyes met, and in that fragile moment, their love seemed larger than kingdoms, a vision not of rebellion, but of healing. But the world outside the cave was not so gentle. Echoes of marching feet shook the earth, and the crack of drums drew nearer. The warriors of Nkwazi and Oshina were not yet clashing, but their chants filled the night with menace. Kwame tightened his grip on Amora's hand. "If they find us, they will tear us apart in the name of duty. But I swear to you, Amora, I will not surrender. If they demand my life, they may take it, but not my love." Amora lifted her chin, her eyes blazing with the firelight. "And if they demand mine, they will learn that a woman's love is stronger than their hate. They can bind my body, but my heart will never kneel." Together, they pressed their foreheads close, whispering a vow as the war drums thundered outside. "We will not be pawns of division. If we must die, we die together. But if we live, we will live to bring peace." And so, hidden in the shadows while chaos brewed outside, Kwame and Amora bound themselves not just in love, but in a dream of unity, a dream worth risking everything. At dawn, the warriors of Nkwazi poured into Tsanari from the west, their shields glinting red in the sunrise. From the east, the Oshina war band advanced, spears raised like a forest of steel. The neutral village had never seen such a sight, 2 armies converging, drums pounding, voices raised in war songs that carried the weight of centuries. Farmers dropped their baskets. Children were swept into hiding. Women barred their doors. The baobab tree at the village center stood tall, ancient and unmoving, as if it alone remembered the time before hatred. The Nkwazi leader, broad-shouldered and fierce, planted his spear in the earth. "Return our prince," he thundered, or we shall take him by force." Across the square, Oshina's captain slammed his shield and roared, "Give us our princess, or we shall reduce this village to ashes." The people of Tsanari pleaded, voices trembling, "This is neutral ground. No blood has ever been shed here. Do not break the peace of our fathers." But neither side bent. Old pride was too heavy, old grudges too loud. From the shadows of their hiding place, Kwame and Amora heard the cries and the clash of shields. No longer could they bear to see the village, innocent and undeserving, torn apart for their sake. Hand in hand, they stepped into the square. Gasps erupted. Warriors froze mid-breath. There stood Kwame, son of Nkwazi, tall and unyielding. Beside him, Amora of Oshina, her chin lifted proudly. "Here we are," Kwame declared, his voice carrying across the tense silence. "If it is blood you seek, then let it be ours. But no more shall your hate consume the innocent." Amora's voice rose clear and defiant. "We are not pawns of your anger. If you would kill us together. But you shall not drag us back into chains." The warriors surged forward, both sides shouting. Nkwazi spears pointed at Oshina shields, Oshina blades gleamed toward Nkwazi hearts. Tsanari's elders threw themselves between the armies, arms raised high. "No blood in our village. Do not defile this ground." But the tension was unbearable. One wrong move, one trembling hand, and the first spear would fly. The square shook with fury, yet silence cut deeper than the noise. Everyone's eyes locked on the two figures standing together, the prince and the princess, daring to defy generations of hate. It was the moment of decision. War, or something else entirely. And as the sun climbed higher, its light fell across Kwame and Amora, bound not by treaties or decrees, but by a love that challenged the blades pointed at their hearts. The world seemed to hold its breath. The square throbbed with the sound of a coming storm, boots on dirt, shields struck in time, voices that had been trained to answer with spears. For a single heartbeat, the world felt ready to split in two. Kwame and Amora did not move away. They walked forward together, hands clasped, and stepped between the lines of Nkwazi and Oshina warriors as if the space itself belonged to them. Silence crashed down. The drums faltered. Men who had been ready to kill stood frozen, metal inches from skin, breath sharp in the sun. "Stop!" Kwame's voice cut through the tension, clear and cold. He planted his feet, turned so both sides could see his face, and lifted his free hand. "If your anger burns for me and Amora, let it burn at our feet. We will not make you spill the blood of those who did not fight this quarrel." Amora faced the east, where her father's warriors longed to rush forward, and then the west, where Nkwazi's captains gripped their spears. Her voice, though softer, carried the same steadiness. "We are two people," she said. "Not a contest. If your honor needs saving, do it with your courage, not with the lives of innocents." A ripple passed through the crowd, shock first, then something like doubt. The war captains exchanged glances. Old men gripped staffs tighter, and mothers pressed children close. For a moment the world held its breath on the edge of a spear. "Kill them," a young warrior from Nkwazi hissed, fingers whitening on his spear haft. "Let the prince be taught to obey." "Or seize her," another from Oshina muttered. "Return her home in chains, that will teach the traitor's son." Kwame's jaw tightened. He looked not like a prince pleading, but like a man who had weighed the cost and chosen the harder road. "You would teach me by killing the woman I love? That is not teaching, that is cowardice." Amora stepped forward so that the tip of a spear almost brushed her robe. She did not flinch. "If you strike us for love, you will not heal your wound. You will only cut another." Her eyes searched the faces before her, the eager, the furious, the tired. "Ask yourselves, who benefits when we spill blood today? Who is safer tomorrow?" An old trading woman from Tsanari, one who had watched the two kingdoms trade in peace in her youth, called out, voice cracked but steady, "Children of the same land have bickered and mended before. The fields do not ask which side planted the seed. The river gives water to both banks. What have you learned that makes you ready to tear our world apart for a prince and a princess? The words moved like a pebble dropped into a still pond. A few spears lowered an inch. A drummer's hand stilled. The captain's eyes flicked to their elders, searching for permission to break the pattern that had defined them for years. But habit is a hard thing to break. Pride snapped back into place. An elder from Nkwazi, voice like gravel, spat, "He is our blood. He must answer to us." Across the square, an Uchenna chief bellowed, "She dishonored our house. Return her or face our wrath." Kwame raised his head and let the anger in their voices fall upon him like rain. "If it is my blood you defend," he said slowly, "then kill me. If it is your honor you fear, take me and judge me. But do not paint our people's hands with blood that will only stain their own future." Amora stepped so close their shoulders touched. "If it must be a choice between our deaths and the killing of others, take us," she said. "Spare the village. Spare the farmers. Spare the children who will inherit this hatred if you let it grow." The captains hesitated. They had been trained to obey the loudest command, but the loudest voices were not the only measure anymore. Somewhere along the edge of the square, a boy, no more than 12, dared to run from between his mother's skirts and stand by the lover's feet. He looked up at the warriors and shouted, "Let them live. My little sister fetches water from the same stream as your boys do. If you kill them, who will fetch the water tomorrow?" A murmur moved through both lines, soft as cloth. The drumbeat slowed to a stopped pulse. Some warriors crouched, lowering their spears completely. Others did not. The moment split the square. A few faces softened, others hardened. Chiefs barked orders, voices cracking under the strain of a decision they did not want to make. Men who had lived by the certainty of an enemy's outline now found that outline blurred by the sight of two people stripped of title and brought down to their human selves. Kwame and Amora stood firm in the middle, breathing as if in prayer, not to gods, but to the stubbornness of human hearts. Each knew the cost of the stance they had taken. Each knew that courage from two could only change a crowd if the crowd was willing to see itself anew. For now, war did not break out. Spears did not find flesh. The square held a fragile pause, like a blade balanced on a single finger. But the pause was not peace. It was the thin, tense place before a storm either falls or dissolves. Eyes turned to leaders. Leaders weighed old debts and new shame. The lover's stand had bought time. Perhaps only a breath, but it was enough to show the first crack in a long wall. And in that crack, something unexpected began to enter, the question of whether the future might be chosen instead of inherited. The square, still heavy with the weight of almost war, began to hum with something else, not rage, not blind loyalty, but unease. The villagers who had crowded behind the warriors shifted, whispering among themselves. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers lowered their hands from spear hilts, and old men leaned heavily on their staffs, their eyes no longer fierce but thoughtful. It was as though the lover's words had loosened a knot that had strangled the two kingdoms for generations. A woman from Uchenna broke the silence first. Her voice trembled, but it carried. "How many more graves must we dig? My husband fell in the last border raid. Tell me, what did that death give me but loneliness? And now you ask me to bury more sons for pride." Her cry stirred others. An Nkwazi farmer stepped forward, soil still clinging to his hands. "When my cattle stray across the border, Uchenna grass feeds them. When drought burns your fields, our market sells you grain. We have shared quietly, even as our chiefs shouted war. Must I now raise my hand against the same neighbors who fed my children?" The warriors' spears wavered. The youths, whose chants had been loudest for blood, now looked uncertain. They had been raised on songs of enemies, but the faces before them looked less like foes and more like themselves. An elder woman, older than any chief present, her back bent but her eyes sharp, hobbled forward with the aid of a staff. Her voice rasped like wind in dry grass. "I was a girl when the first quarrel began. I saw fields burned, children stolen, homes turned to ash. I asked then, As I ask now, what did we gain? The earth still drinks our tears, the river still flows past both our doors, and hatred still eats us like locusts. Have we not fed this fire long enough? Her words sank deep. A hush fell over the crowd, heavier than silence. Even the chiefs, so quick to thunder before, found themselves caught by her question. Kwame gripped Amora's hand, his chest heaving with quiet hope. He saw it, the trembling in the people's resolve, the first spark of doubt about the old hatred that had ruled their lives. Amora's eyes glistened as she whispered, almost to herself but loud enough for those nearest to hear, "If love can stand where armies tremble, then perhaps it is not our weakness, but our strength." And that whisper spread, carried from mouth to mouth like wind over tall grass. Love, not weakness. Love, not betrayal. Love, not war. Some warriors lowered their spears completely, dropping them into the dust with a clang that sounded almost like a prayer. Others followed, the rhythm building as one after another gave in, until the sharp forest of spears that had threatened the lovers became a field of fallen iron. For the first time in generations, Nkwazi and Uchenna stood not as enemies, but as people staring at their own reflection across the line. The anger that had ruled for centuries wavered under the weight of something far more dangerous, the courage to question it. And so the square did not erupt in blood. Instead, it rippled with a new, unsteady current, the turning of hearts, slow but undeniable, like a great river beginning to shift its course. The day dawned unlike any other in living memory. Instead of war drums, the air of Tsanari rang with songs, not of battle, but of unity. The baobab tree, under whose shadow armies had nearly clashed, was now adorned with woven garlands of palm and bright cloth. Villagers, warriors, and chiefs from both kingdoms gathered, their faces marked not by rage but by curiosity, wonder, and a fragile hope. For the first time, Nkwazi and Uchenna stood together in peace. The chiefs and elders still shifted uneasily at the front. Tradition weighed heavily on them, their pride wounded by how quickly the tide of their people had turned. Yet even they could not deny the voices of their sons and daughters, who had refused to pick up arms. The oldest among them spoke slowly, "We have resisted for too long. If the young are willing to build a new world, who are we to keep them chained to our anger? Let these two stand as a bridge between us." And so, though grudgingly, the elders gave their blessing. Kwame stood tall in the deep blue robes of Nkwazi royalty, embroidered with the golden sun of his kingdom. Amora shone beside him in Uchenna's flowing crimson, her hair crowned with a simple circlet of cowrie shells, a symbol of prosperity and grace. When they clasped hands before the people, it was not just a joining of two hearts, but of two histories. Their voices rose together, strong and unwavering. "We do not marry for ourselves alone. We marry so that our people may remember that love is greater than hate, and peace stronger than war." The crowd erupted in cheers, tears glistening in the eyes of both young and old. The wedding feast stretched across Tsanari Square. Tables overflowed with roasted yam, millet cakes, spiced goat, and bowls of river fish. Drummers from both lands beat their rhythms together, weaving once clashing songs into a harmony that pulsed with life. Warriors of Nkwazi danced with maidens of Uchenna. Children from both sides laughed as they chased each other around the square. And for the first time, no one asked where one child belonged, whether to Nkwazi or Uchenna. They were simply children, free and unburdened. As the sun dipped, Kwame and Amora knelt beneath the great baobab. With the chiefs as witnesses, they swore a final oath: "Never again shall the river of our people run red with each other's blood. Where one suffers, the other shall bring aid. Where one rejoices, the other shall share in the dance." The crowd roared in approval. Even the elders, at last, bowed their heads. Night fell, and the sky glittered with stars. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the baobab, carrying with it the laughter and songs of a people reborn. The wedding of Kwame and Amora became more than a union of two souls. It was the dawn of a covenant between two kingdoms. A peace not written by treaties, but sealed in love, witnessed by all, and guarded in the hearts of those who had once been sworn enemies. In that moment, the hatred of generations dissolved into the promise of a new story, one that began not with swords, but with vows spoken beneath the eternal sky. The morning after the wedding, Tsanari stirred with a new kind of energy. Where once the marketplace had stood silent, caught between fear and mistrust, it now overflowed with voices, colors, and goods from both kingdoms. Merchants of Nkwazi spread out their woven mats, displaying copper ornaments, dyed cloth, and millet from their fertile fields. Traders of Uchenna unfurled baskets of ground spices, carved wooden masks, and salt drawn from their plains. What had once been weapons carried across the border were now replaced by gifts, bargains, and laughter. The chiefs of both kingdoms walked side by side through the crowd, their staffs of authority no longer symbols of division but guardianship of a fragile unity. Villagers marveled to see them share a calabash of palm wine and speak not of war strategies but of trade routes and festivals. Young men of Nkwazi and Uchenna who had once stood in lines of battle now sat together at long benches, sharing roasted meat. Women braided each other's hair and exchanged recipes, while children ran about, mixing freely, unbothered by old labels of enemy or ally. Bit by bit, mistrust gave way to fellowship. But what most bound the people together was the story of Kwame and Amora. Around fires at night, griots began to weave their tale into song. How two hearts stood against spears, how love mended what war had torn, how kingdoms bowed not to pride but to peace. Parents sang it as lullabies. Farmers hummed it in their fields. Warriors repeated it as a reminder that true strength lay not in the sword but in the courage to forgive. Within a single season, their love became a legend, carried in whispers, songs, and dances across villages, rivers, and hills. Kwame and Amora, now rulers by both right and respect, did not retreat into palaces. They walked among their people, settling disputes, encouraging trade, and reminding all that peace must be tended like a garden. They built a great hall at Tsanari, not as a fortress, but as a marketplace and meeting ground for both kingdoms. On its walls, they inscribed the vow they had made beneath the baobab. Where one suffers, the other shall bring aid. Where one rejoices, the other shall share in the dance. Generations would gather there to renew those words. And so it was said that from the day Kwame and Amora joined hands, the bitterness of centuries faded like mist before the rising sun. The river that had once divided Nkwazi and Uchenna became a bridge of trade and laughter. The drums that had once sounded for war now beat for festivals and harvests. Long after Kwame and Amora were gone, their names were not spoken with sorrow but with reverence. Their story became a folktale passed from grandparents to grandchildren, a reminder that love can heal what hate destroys, and that even the deepest wounds of history can be mended when hearts choose peace. And so the people would say, whenever quarrels threaten to rise again, remember Kwame and Amora, for they showed us that love can rebuild kingdoms, and peace is the greatest inheritance. And with that, the two kingdoms stepped into a new dawn that would outlive them all.